Hello, everyone. It's another week of the Anchore open source software community stream where we talk about some issues that need discussion and learn some things about vulnerability matching and SBOMs. With me on the call, I have Keith, Chris, and Alex. Um, and we usually start out with updates. So tomorrow on the overnight Grype database, we changed the config for it. Tomorrow, there should be Alma Linux specific advisories. So until tonight's database builds, the open source Grype database is always considered Alma Linux, just a one-for-one clone of Red Hat Linux in terms of package versions that are vulnerable. And this is fairly accurate because there's some truth to the statement that it's a one-for-one clone, but there's some things like module build numbers or like Alma fixed a package at a lower upstream than Red Hat when we previously had false positives on Alma. And we expect those to be going away like tomorrow. So that's the only update I have. Does anybody else have any news or updates before we get into needs discussion?
Not that I can think of.
Good for now. Oh, but
Cool.
big props on the NeoVim shirt, Will. There's literally dozens
Oh,
of us now, so I love it.
thanks. Yeah. Um, cool. Um, yeah, okay. There's no new community threads to look at, so we'll jump into needs discussion, pull requests, and issues. Does anybody have something that they are dying to discuss?
One we talked about a little bit today that was on the community call was the deinstall status PR. Keith, thank you for taking that over for me. I just had a lot of stuff in front of it. I had tagged Alex at the bottom of it and just never synced with him about how we can do the conventions for four cataloger constructors with two tasks when a couple of them are moving to the deprecated status. Keith probably has just encountered the weirdness of this, so maybe we can talk about what this should look like for the
Yeah.
final PR.
Yep.
So yeah, I'd like to give like 2 seconds of context before we jump in, just so people who haven't been looking at this PR all day have some hope of understanding the conversation. So one thing I learned in this is that depackage packages like managers, like I think Aptitude manages depackages, depackage itself manages depackages. When you uninstall stuff, if you don't pass dash dash purge, your config files and other metadata stick around, and the packages still like exists in a deinstalled state. And so the Syft cataloger was reporting these deinstalled packages. That's probably not correct behavior. Like this person used to have Git in this image, and then they removed it, but the config files stayed, and there's an uninstalled entry in the database. Doesn't really mean we found the Git depackage. So this is probably a correct change. We're going to make it configurable just so we don't break anyone who is counting on our finding those. And then this PR is close to ready to go, but there were some CI weirdness. And that's about where my context ends and the conversation begins. What's going on with these integration tests?
All right, so I give a link there in the chat that points to something that we sort of need to talk about here. So you see at the very end of this cataloger configuration, this is the file where we have all of the catalogers configured, and like some default configurations get passed in here, and
So many catalogers. Sorry, keep
right,
going.
like all the package catalogers and different things. And at the very bottom, you'll see that these four catalogers are deprecated. And the reason for this is because we don't break compatibility with Syft 1.0, 1.x. So if we have to change a cataloger configuration, we don't actually change it. We add another function that takes the configuration and deprecate the original one or something along those lines to make sure that we remain API compatible and also configuration compatible on both sides of that. So the weirdness here is that what we're doing in this PR is adding a configuration to this Debian depackage cataloger, and that's really the only change. And so we have a couple of different options here, but that the check that we have, we end up with four constructors, two of which don't have configurations, two of which do have configurations, and we have a check that says, oh, you have some exported constructor functions that aren't in this list of cataloger configurations. So it's like good, good checks to have, like adding things and forgetting to add it to this list here, that kind of thing. So we have a couple of different paths forward, but one path is that we set up two catalogers and we make a new name for this Debian D package cataloger, which is kind of unfortunate because it's already a good name and I don't really want to change it. And the other option is we change the existing one to some different name, maybe, because if somebody has it configured, they would get the new one with the configuration anyway. And it would work just fine because all the defaults are giving them what they should have for defaults, I believe. So anyway, that's kind of like a probably fairly confusing summary of like the question here.
So it sounds like I'm just going to try to summarize a little bit. So it sounds like Syft had what is basically a subtle bug where we would report deinstalled D packages as packages. And we, their community members made a PR to fix that. We like to put changes in behavior behind the configuration, but previously the D package cataloger wasn't configurable in any way. And so adding the first option is gonna like break libraries that link against that cataloger directly. So there's interface concerns. Is that what this test is telling us? I'm not sure I understand what this test is telling us.
Well, that's why we changed that's why we changed the cataloger. So if you look in the PR, I can, give me just a second, I'll give a link to the specific thing, but there. Why is that?
Thanks. Hey,
That wasn't the
I
specific.
moved the URL of the wrong tab and couldn't get home.
There we go. That was the specific link. The first one wasn't.
I mean, I guess I need to. I mean, I can kind of go a bunch of different ways on the cataloger. Well, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Will, you were asking a question about like what the test was. I don't want to interrupt that.
Well, right. I was trying to understand like what because one of the things that Syft is trying to do is we're trying to have a number of sorry, I can't talk and drive at the same time. So we try to have a lot of like sort of convention and completeness tests where it's easy where CI tries to verify that all the catalogers can be called in basically the same way and that all the that if you add a new package metadata type, you also bump the JSON schema and also add, there's like an array somewhere with a list of all the metadata types that we need in some places. And so there's a completeness test that like reflects on the package and makes sure that the set of so it's like that kind of test, right? Like, please don't break the calling conventions and the naming conventions and the arrays that give all of a given type of thing. We have like one of those type of tests that's failing, but that's like the end of my understanding. Like what is actually the problem here?
I mean, yeah. So like the reason for that test. So I think one of the largest maintenance challenges for Syft is making certain like over its lifespan that we are really clear that uh, capabilities aren't drifting from what's it can actually do. So like we make some software change, we want to make certain like, oh, is that still expressible in the API? Can that still be reached? Um, so like, this particular test, and we can like debate about the specifics and the nuances of this test, but this is supposed to be saying, hey, like we have this higher level construct of a thing called a task, and all catalogers or anything that you ever want to do in Syft to go analyze something, it's wrapped in a task. And we also have these cataloger constructors, so it's just functions that we found, static functions that we found in a package that we know conventionally to be where we put catalogers. So we presume to be they're constructors because they start with new and we have this particular pattern to it. There should be like a one-to-one here. And in this, specifically in this one particular file, it's the file that you're looking at. And if we don't see a one-to-one correlation, then it's a hint that something is probably wrong. So this test is meant to be a forcing function to follow the conventions and to make certain that we're not like drifting from the source of truth. Like we didn't like accidentally unwire a cataloger and lost some functionality, even though the tests are still passing. Because like, yeah, unit tests can keep passing, but like if we just accidentally unwired it, it's useless. So that's what this test and these kinds of tests are trying to defend against. Helping this kind of like long-term maintenance of Syft to be easier. We don't have to think about it or really check extremely hard on every PR that like, oh, you've accidentally unwired it by doing this nuanced thing.
Right. And so what you're looking at here is like exactly like line 19 is like the new cataloger function. And then if you go up line 14 was the old cataloger function that didn't take a configuration. And so both of those functions need to be in that configuration that we were looking at. Or it
Can I?
says, oh, you've got things that are exported that aren't configured.
Yeah, and like I think and yes, whenever we do add a config, and there wasn't one, we don't want to break the signature. So I think all that's well reasoned. I kind of want to double back though and talk about kind of the definition of a deinstalled package versus not, because I think it influences everything going forward. Because there's two ways I can interpret this PR. One interpretation is that a deinstalled package never has software in it. Thus, we're fixing a bug. We're claiming that there's software packages in something where we just know there's not. And the other interpretation is like, well, it's fuzzy and we don't know, or it's not always true. Therefore, the end user probably has a preference, can have a say in this and will want to configure. So we'll have the same default, which is like fixing this behavior, but then someone can always go back to the old behavior. Are we convinced of one of those two realities? Like this is purely a bug, or this truly is something that needs to be configured that the user should have a say in?
I think it's a bug, but because we've allowed for the behavior before and it's on that line, we would be kind of like dropping the users who rely on it or who use it off a cliff if we were to change it or like without the config.
Okay. I think I'm trying to imagine being a user and expecting Syft to continue reporting deinstalled packages as packages that are present. And I think one of the things we've talked about is that like not everything gets removed. Like I think one of the package managers, you can pass dash purge when you uninstall something, and that actually removes everything. But like config files and associated directories aren't removed. And I think somebody was explaining to me maybe the reason this is a good default behavior is, let's say that your NeoVim binary broke, and so you apt-get remove nvim or whatever it is on your distro, and then you want it back. You didn't necessarily want that to nuke your config directory. You wanted to replace the broken binaries, and I think that's a reasonable position for the package manager to take. And so I think my question is sort of thinking downstream about the vulnerability scanning is like, can you hide a CVE in the stuff that's left when you remove something without dash purge? Like, can you hide a vulnerability in there? And the answer is almost certainly yes, but only in like a very technical sense, right? And so I'm just, I don't know. I'm on the fence. I think if we were reviewing the Debian dpackage cataloger for the first time, like we were adding this cataloger to Syft, I think we would just, and we noticed this at that time, we would just consider it a bug and fix it before, and it wouldn't be configurable. Um, I'm wondering because one of the things we like to give people is sort of the knob of being risk tolerant versus risk averse in like gripe scans, right? And saying like, I would like to risk a lot of false positives but never miss anything because I'm very risk averse, or I would like to have very few false positives so I don't have any noise, but risk a couple false negatives. Because I'm very risk tolerant and I don't want my team dealing with noise. And I'm what I'm not sure of the answer to is, do the deinstalled, like, does the junk they left contribute to the risk that an image is vulnerable? And if so, this setting is like part of that knob. And if not, it's not. Does that seem like a reasonable way to frame the question?
Is it risky to treat it truly as just a bug fix and not have a configuration to go back?
But what I mean is, like, is there, like, can you see the omission of a deinstalled package, like, representing a false negative in a scan? I think that's the question. I think somebody mentioned like, init scripts and like scripts and config directories. And I don't know, a lot of that stuff is based on convention, and I'm not like deeply versed in like depackage packaging conventions and rules specifically. So I don't think I'm necessarily the right person to answer. But that's my question is do, if this I think if this configuration deserves to exist, it's because it's on the not on the like it's because it deserves to be one of the switches you can throw as you make gripe risk more false positives in order to have fewer false negatives. But I don't know whether that statement is like, I don't know whether it does deserve to be there, but I think if the config deserves to exist, that's why. I don't know if
Well,
that was just confusing.
that's uh actually, sorry, Chris, you mind if I just respond real quick?
Yeah,
Because
go ahead, Alex, and then yeah, go ahead.
what I think what you said, Will, is interesting because you said, you know, a lot of it was framing it in terms of gripe. So I think there's a slightly different way to maybe approach this. Like if gripe had the way to observe that something was deinstalled versus installed, that might solve the issue without having to make this configurable on the Syft side per se. Meaning like we can, like what if fixing the Syft bug is really adding a status or a deinstalled true false boolean to the metadata, um, and letting gripe like be able to observe that, or
Yeah,
some hybrid of these things.
I think.
uh,
Yeah, go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, so I mean, I think when we talked about this before, we did a little experimentation, and the conclusion that we came to was that the software was not installed. Right? I think that was the conclusion that we came to. It was when you did a deinstall, you were left with configuration files only and not any of the software that was in question. And so because of that, if I'm a user, I would not expect to see those packages. If I do a scan with Syft, I would not expect it to tell me that that package is installed. Like that's the differentiator to me, is that like the actual thing with the binary that would execute, that would have a vulnerability going to the gripe side of things, it isn't there. It's not in the
let's
configuration. It's in the binary that we got removed. In a general sense, I think is what came to the understanding about.
Yeah. And Chris, I've already, let's go for it, Chris.
No, I actually have an anecdote for this because at my previous job at Capital One, when we were doing some vulnerability scanning, we were asked for some systems to determine if something had been installed. And one of the ways we did do this was via the depackage deinstall status as long as it hadn't been purged. And that was definitely a flip on, do we have to blow this all away and stand things back up, or can we just like system admin our way out of this thing? So to Alex's point that this is an action that Gripe should take against like, flagging a package or not, that gives the knob that Will was talking about, while also keeping Syft kind of close to this is the whole truth. Like as long as we put like a little metadata flag that says this was here, but it was deinstalled as described by the package manager, then the SBOM is more accurate temporally too, because it's something that was in the past. And we're taking care of the noise and the frustration of, do you care about things that might have existed on the system at one point in time, or do you just care about what is physically there right now? Like it feels like both sides win in that option.
I'm actually still torn myself because, so like, Keith mentioned like, oh, this is always config files, and I want to say that like, well, it's really also anything that like a post install script would do, or pre-run. I think is one of the other hooks. I mean, like it could be, so yeah, it's meant like spiritually to be like leave your configs behind so the software can be removed because that's the user surface area that you don't want to like mess with or purge. But it is possible for there to be a bug in one of those scripts like that. Like I feel like I'm saying it like it feels contrived. Like I already hate my own example, but to what Will is saying is like, well, if we have folks that are risk averse versus not, like that whole spectrum that we're very used to seeing, um, I kind of wonder what would be the issue that would be filed next after we like take action here. Like, and I'm also a little squeamish on continuing to say that there are packages when we are basically saying that there's like half packages or something. Like what is this? It's like this is like a 1% of the package is left behind, so we're going to say the package is still there, or like what is that? Like
Yeah,
there's no nice
Yeah.
spot in
there's this
this.
hidden little field that says it was deinstalled. So you have a whole thing that
So
describes the package existing, but then it's
yeah.
hidden.
Yeah. I think one other position we could take is that if changes in the file system were left behind after the package is deinstalled, Syft captures file metadata, right? So there's like path names and digests and stuff. And I think actually one interesting thing, so by default, Syft only
Mm,
captures metadata for files that are owned by a package, right? Syft doesn't go and take a digest of everything on the file system because it takes a really long time and people don't want to wait that long for their SBOMs. And so one effect of this change is that if there are like config files associated with the package, they will vanish from the SBOM because there's no longer a package to hang them off of by default. And
yeah.
and so I almost wish, but like if that weren't true, Grype could just notice, oh hey, there's a bunch of files under like this config directory and care about that if it wanted to.
But
So
it
it's interesting. It's like more information lossy than it seems like because the files no longer have anything to hang them off of, and so they just vanish. Um, I don't really know what to do about that. That's just an observation.
Go for it,
There
Keith.
are config options though. I mean, if somebody cares about that, they can enable all files, right? Like, so there are ways they could get the list of all files, not just the things that are owned by packages. And then if they're using containers and they have a series of, um, of different steps, right? If we do an all layers scan, then like that would have the package if it was installed at one of those layers, even if it's like removed at the end in this deinstalled status or something. Obviously, that wouldn't show up for everything. And also, like I 100% agree that like having some indication about this would be great. But I think it's like what the end users generally would want. That's like secondary to just show me the things that are installed right now. I mean, that's kind of like why we
Right.
usually do the full all layer scan by default. They want to see,
Yeah.
just show me what what you think is installed. And like
And
that's the thing to me.
yeah, and I think that's sort of the core like Syft. Like Syft does a lot of stuff, but the sort of core thing it does is here's an OCI image. What's in it? Like what's installed in it? And deinstalled D packages are not installed in it anymore. Somebody deinstalled them. And so I think there's an argument to be made for just this is just unconfigurable cataloger behavior. We should never have had those. And if you're really, really worried that somebody installed a bad package and there's still like some sort of evil script or like bad Lua file hanging out, then you could you can tell Syft to like capture the digest of all files on the system, and Syft could do that, and you could look at them. I don't know if that's the right answer. That's definitely the answer that results in the simplest code, and I think the least surprising default behavior. But I don't know if we need more knobs than that, and that's to me what the hangup is.
I think I'm also currently on the side of treating it like, so there's two buckets described at the beginning. Is this a truly purely a bug, or is it a bug and some feature? And I'm in the camp of it's purely a bug, and because essentially because we're having troubles right now talking through what that new feature would necessarily be. Like, let's just say that we added a configuration um that adds this. Like, I don't think we've even convinced ourselves that, like, is this even a package? Like, what is left behind? This is like a package fragment, and we don't have a good way to describe package fragments other than the user having to do a graph analysis of package to file relationships and package manager claims that would be left behind, by the way, like that we can see like the full list of files that would have been left, I think, to do that diff. And I feel like we're just lacking the right entity, a right place to put that information. So I feel like it shouldn't default to a package because it's convenient to make it a package.
Yeah.
So I'm currently on team. This is purely a bug. Probably don't need a config. Simplifies a bunch of things.
Yeah. I think I'm on team. This is a bug, but if I had a magic wand, the files of deinstalled packages would stay in default settings.
I mean, it's not outside of the realms of possibility, I guess. I'm lacking
Yeah. I mean, maybe
I'm
it's
lacking how
kind
that would
of,
be done.
yeah, maybe it would be kind of surprising behavior. I don't know. I think I'm just
I
on team. This was always a bug in the depackage cataloger, and it shouldn't be configurable behavior. And if somebody feels strongly that we're wrong, they should tell us.
you know what? I'm always in favor of the easy fix and then to be proven wrong. So make it easy, and then if we see an issue, we'll show that issue. We'll show that issue on live stream and be like, "Hey, this person used this and we messed up changing this. We'll make it We'll make it
Yeah.
toggleable."
And this can be like a fun like listener challenge, like find me a vulnerability that can be exploited from stuff that's left after a depackage was deinstalled. Like that would be, I would love to know that, just to have one to point at. So
And with the
That's
caveat
if
that you're not Alex like cringing at himself, like making the contrived example, right? We're not
no, no,
looking
no,
for the esoteric contrived. We want like the real thing.
real example, like actual CVE ID, just the affected files are left behind when you deinstall a real depackage. That's it.
I
Doesn't
put
have to be that contrived.
I put that in the same bucket as, like, I'm waiting for the CVE against a man page. Like, it's there.
It's
It
coming.
probably exists.
It's
It's
coming
that's too long.
regardless.
Denial of service. The Getman page is too long. It's a denial of service attack on my pager.
But we also, I mean, we have the monkey typewriter situation now with like so many security reports being generated via like LLM that eventually an LLM is gonna like hallucinate that a man page is vulnerable. Someone's not gonna look at it, they're gonna file it, and then the curl author is gonna get really mad really quickly. Because it's gonna
Oh,
be because our luck it is gonna be the man page of Curl that gets that. And he's gonna quit.
okay. So anyway, I think we should go back to this PR and simplify it to make the configuration not like to make the behavior not configurable. That might even just be going back to an earlier commit on this branch. Um,
Oh, cool. Okay.
anyway, that I think
Well,
that's a great resolution, at least for this call. Does anybody have anything we should talk about next?
I have nothing in the queue right now.
All right.
going back to those list of
Here-
issues.
here's the list of issues. Uh, does anybody have anything they really
We've chatted about this before. I think it's at the bottom of page 1. Allow for scanning multiple scan targets at once.
We've talked about it a lot. I think it fell into the what's the SBOM look like? Like if I run or
Well,
Syft, right? If I
well, yeah,
run
this,
Syft,
but this
yeah.
isn't Syft. This is Grype. Is that?
Oh, so you
As
just
I
get a
agreed,
giant
Syft
vulnerability
is different.
object.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
I mean, so I guess I mean, I think that the TLDR is, we have an equivalent issue in SIP that's like, well, if we scan multiple things, like say 2 container images, um, we don't know if it should be multiple SBOMs or if it should be a single document, multiple SBOMs, or if it should be a single SBOM that somehow describes these things as packages. So like we've kind of spiritually kicked that can down the road. And this is in Grype. And this is like, hey, I give it, say, 10 container images. Or another example would be I want to give it a reference to a multi-architecture container image. So it's really like an in many images and in many manifests, I should say. And I want to scan, like do a vuln scan against all of them. And so right now, the only way to do that is to like pass them all in individually for each, batch script for, all architectures go invoke Grype. And like that's not ideal for the end user case. So this is about being able to say, hey, I want to give you one thing and maybe you interpret it as many things, or I want to give you in many things. And I just want you to give me all the vulnerabilities because Grype is different in the sense of like we don't have a in document except for CycloneDX. So we might have to. So for a second, maybe let's just talk about Grype table output, Grype JSON, and then maybe a second part of the conversation can be about the other formats for it. But if we stick to like just like standard Grype output, um, does anybody? I guess I'll pause there. That's what this is supposed to be like. Here's all the matches for all of the things that you told me to scan. Um, what do folks think about that?
I think I have the same question as Syft, which is how does that get represented in various SBOM formats like CycloneDX, for example, if we have that output?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Well, for Grype JSON and the table, I think it's much simpler. Like you could have one big table, you could have multiple tables for the JSON output. It's always really like you're always showing the particular package with the package ID. So I mean, you could say you don't need anything, um, or you could say that you can put it in multiple subsections. Like it's much simpler than say like when you're talking about SPDX and CycloneDX. There's a lot of restrictions about what you're allowed to put in and how it's supposed to be interpreted. Whereas like for us, we can, we could rev like the JSON format, for instance, for to have
Yeah.
this kind of feature.
Well, and I think the change to the JSON would be pretty small because we just want to say like what like on the artifact, right? We already have like Grype is the output is already basically a list of matches where a match is like this is a vulnerability, this is a package, and we think that this vulnerability affects this package as they appeared in the SBOM or those image or whatever. And so we could just have like more of those pairs, right? It seems pretty simple to imagine like, oh, I scanned 5 images at once, so there's like 5 times as many matches, and all we need to do is think about how the artifact says which image it's from, right? There's an artifact, the artifact pair in the match is the like package or whatever that we think is affected by a CVE. And we just want to know like how does the artifact say say which image it's from. So
Yeah,
yeah, and
I feel like it would be like you keep the matches section as it is. You add a optional sources section, um, and you can put the ID. You know, so the match
yeah,
is a tuple of vulnerability artifact and match details. We could, in theory, just say, and here's also the source that we're talking about. Just put the ID in question, and it would map up to one of the IDs in the sources section. I mean, this is like the 4-minute, like what would you change in the document without really designing it. But I feel like that would be like the first pass in my head, and there's probably better ways, and probably more ways that we need to think about for for Grype 1.0, like the JSON output will probably be changing. But we also, I think we've said in the past, like we want to be able to express like biasing one noun over another, being able to say like, oh, by package or by action or by vulnerability, by etc., and not just have like the tuple of all things, which is a match. So how does it play into that world? And we haven't designed those outputs, so like it's still fairly open.
Yeah, I like the sources, and then so there's just a list of sources as a key in the top level of the Grype JSON, and then all the artifacts can just say which source they're from. That that makes a lot of sense. Um,
But I feel like this was one that I think I'm definitely interested in, like the first order question of like, do we think this is a bad idea? Do we think that there's reasons to hold off on trying to do something like this? Um,
so,
do we think that there's
yeah,
other things that we're not thinking about here?
Does it have to be does it have to default into be like one JSON document, or could we output multiple ones and then have Grype know how to stitch those together into some kind of like viewable report or whatever? Right? Like as far as the table output, that's something, but we could also just like give it a directory option where it generates all the vulnerability JSON for each source, so it's their own thing that they get. Like why? I'm just I think as someone who's consuming and using Grype, I would want an individual thing per source rather than just a giant new format that I'd know how to map. I have to like learn how to map sources to vulnerabilities in.
If you require a directory output, so now you have basically two modes of operating for the same command. So like, Grype with a single source, you can like pipe to JQ and it'll work. But if you provide multiple sources, now you can't.
True.
It also would have a different structure in those cases potentially. So it's like, so you kind of want, the modes to not change given some conditional input for any one command or
yeah,
subcommand.
Mm.
yeah. I think that makes sense. I think I'm generally in favor of this. I think one thing I'm basically worried about a few things. Um, One is performance. It's already pretty easy to get out of memory by scanning too big a file system with Grype. So you can imagine if you have this like giant Helm chart with, 50 images in it, that's also going to run into that problem. I think we might accidentally paint Syft into a corner by having Grype need to firm up what it expects in a like multi-SBOM, multi-target scan, and then Syft would have to meet that output, even if Syft didn't want to. I think that's probably the best argument against just diving in and doing this right now. Um, and then I think it's not obvious what like exactly what the output should be, but I kind of like the idea of somebody being able to do like cat, star.sbom pipe Grype and get all the matches. Or, Grype my manifest, Grype my directory of SBOMs. And because at the end of the day, like if somebody wanted to write a little bit of Python to like make a giant SBOM out of all their software and send it into Grype, like the distro matching would be a little weird, but that's something that basically would be okay with Grype today, right? Like if we think of like at the end of the day, the input to Grype is a list of packages with like versions and information about where they came from, like PyPy or Debian 8 or whatever. And then the output is like CVEs that might affect those. And there's not really, I don't think there's like a philosophical reason not to accept a pile of SBOMs instead of one big SBOM, if that makes sense. I'll let other people talk now though.
No, that was literally going to be the comment that I had when I raised my hand, which was if we're doing Grype image, or multiple source, then what does the cat X thing pipe into Grype look like? And I agree with everything Will said. I don't think there should be like a philosophical reason for not supporting if we go down this route, not supporting like a glob star.json or piping giving a directory target and getting all the SBOMs summed up from there.
And Keith pointed out on the issue too, the same thing that Will, you were mentioning in terms of like the memory pressure. So like we got that link back to the Syft issue 3263. So hooray. So yeah, I think everyone here has brought up a question or concern of like the output format. So that requires like a proposal. Someone's got to come up with like, what's the best way to do this that, you know, doesn't force everyone to like totally change formats or can be opt-in or et cetera. Like what would that look like? And
Better
yeah,
to
I
do
think
it
the
now,
other
pre
point.
Gripe 1.0.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's good. It's a good discovery for if say we did Gripe 1.0 first, and then we went to go try to add this, and like
Yeah.
we have no way to do it. That would be kind of silly. So it feels like this kind of it doesn't need to be a prereq to Gripe 1.0, but I would.
It should be considered and looked at before then because we
Yeah,
don't want to move to that and then say we ignored this and then kick ourselves for ignoring it after the line has been crossed.
yeah, and the thing that's making me hesitate is, it doesn't mean that we should, um, we must do it though, because I don't want to have to bring in like the Syft, streaming to disk work in order to do Gripe 1.0 per se. Um, like I feel like Gripe could get to 1.0 before we have to tackle like Syft streaming to disk for a lot of its intermediate work. Uh, but anyway, raw thoughts.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I've got a comment here where I'm just saying we discussed this in a recent live stream. It needs proposal. So we need to understand what the output should look like and what the input should look like. And, you know, input is welcome from the community. Like if
Yeah,
somebody has an idea what this should look like, do we have any more like um
like
I think we're
hints.
all
I think
generally in agreement that this would be nice to have, but it would be tricky to get right, and it's just sort of hanging out there. Is that an accurate summary?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it touches a lot of things in the code base. It touches a lot of things that are kind of fundamental. It doesn't, and it's not necessarily in a way that's like overly complicated. It's just the fact that it needs to touch all these things is, I think, what makes it, um, you know, worth a discussion topic, like worth like probably having some proposals on it. But the I think some hints for the format. Um, like I feel like there's two ways to go for the format. It was like one, you just do something totally different, and there's maybe some specific reasons why we need to do something totally different. The other, with some other considerations, kind of go this other way, where it's like, well, what are the things that what is the document shape that preserves like the philosophies that we like try to hold ourselves to today, such as like you know such as like the what I mentioned earlier with the command should have like one mode of output, doesn't swap modes magically, or a document that it's a superset of the current one that we have today. Thus, it doesn't break anybody's existing JQ commands. So like those kinds of things. Like I feel like if we have enough things that are a holdover for what we have today, but brings us forward functionally and is still aligned with like the philosophies that we're doing with these commands, I mean, that would be a proposal that would probably like win, I feel. And I guess all these are
Okay.
kind of like soft considerations. Yeah. But Keith, what you were saying earlier, did I did we capture that or did we? I'm trying to remember exactly what you said. Is it what was the first thing you mentioned?
I mean, it just goes back to how do I associate
Right.
this data with sources? That's
Got it.
what the crux of the issue. And also a little more specifically, like, does that mean we can't use Cyclone DX and the other
Oh yeah.
because we can't represent that with those formats?
That was what. Okay, so my brain was like there was a thread to pull and I could not remember what it was. That was it. Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. So for so Cyclone like kind of doesn't have a way to do this today. Like there's not a way to say like you could have multiple nested components in a Cyclone DX document, but like to say here's the thing that I'm describing, there's only one thing it could be. Um, well, first of all, am I lying about that? Does anyone have a different recollection?
It's a little weirder than that, I think, because what we're describing is a component, and there is a metadata component, which is like the document, but that like we use that to be the source, but that doesn't mean that it's the only source. But then the only relationships we have to use are dependencies, which apparently are what people are expecting in Cyclone DX anyway for like a container to a package like contained by type dependency or type
Yeah,
relationship. So it's a lot more nebulous than like it just has one thing.
yeah,
But I'll just add one other thing, which is I looked at an issue using dependency track not very long ago, and it really is you have to have a very specific like organization of your document
yeah.
for some tools to pick them up. So it's a definite like concern that we would want to understand how to make that work for the tools that we think we care about at least.
Yeah, and that's because this is like essentially overlapping, because of the Cyclone DX document we're really talking about is by definition, at least in SBOM, like it's running to that thing that we're trying to avoid with Syft. And like it could be that this is two passes. Like for the first pass, we just, we don't allow Cyclone DX output for this particular feature. Um, that might be better than like you're saying, choosing a like ontology, like choosing a structure in the document that is arbitrary and thus it's may not be universal in like how people will be able to use it, because we don't want to have to make that decision again when we get feedback saying this doesn't work in XYZ use cases and like arbitrarily change it again. So I almost feel like okay, if we have this kind of feature, maybe we like roll it out on like the formats we control, and then when we have a very clear sense of how any structure we propose would affect the greater ecosystem of things slurping up these documents, we would probably implement it then. But like I feel like the structure of this kind of stuff is a little Wild West. All tools do that structure and SBOM very differently depending on like what their needs are. So yeah.
Okay, so I think we discussed this
Yep.
a fair amount, and,
Yeah.
and it might be fair to just skip Cyclone DX at first, but anyway, so we'll keep thinking about it. Anyone in the community, if you have sort of a strong opinion on what the input or output to this command in particular should look like, let us know on the issue. We'd love to hear from you. If you're one of the people really looking forward to this, we'd love to hear exactly what you're going to do with it. That might help us understand exactly what we should build. Um, let's see, we have about 10 minutes left. Is there anything else we like? We probably have time to touch briefly on another issue. Anybody have anything they really want to talk about?
Dealer's choice.
Looking.
Okay. Um, let's see. These are all pretty big questions. I'll open this one because it's at the top, but the context is pretty current. I think Keith is needs discussion on this.
Oh yeah, this
Um,
is the one we talked about in triage this week.
yeah. So this is
US.
this is a long issue with a bunch of stuff on it. So I'm gonna try to summarize a little bit. So Red Hat has a product called EUS, where basically, if you're on like Red Hat's normal product, then you're on like Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9, and whatever updates you get, you're supposed to move forward. But if people, for whatever reason, don't want to upgrade, maybe their system is really sensitive to downtime, or they just really need one particular version of some RPM or whatever it is, you can get on the extended support channel of Red Hat and say like, okay, I'm going to pay for backported fixes to Red Hat 9.4. And you got like years more support. I think Canonical has a similar product with Ubuntu. I think lots of people are doing this sort of thing. And there's a bunch of stuff in the issue about understanding exactly um, how matching works on Red Hat US, which I don't think is what Keith really wanted to talk about. The Red Hat US matching strategy is kind of complicated. It's going to take more than 10 minutes, but I think the interesting thing here is that um, we have a flag to Grype called dash dash only fixed, which means only show me fixes that I can get. Right? Like don't tell me about CVEs that there's no patch for, because I can't do anything about it. Right? I'm not gonna go fix OpenSSL. I just want to type apt-get update and see fewer CVEs. Show me those CVEs. Um, and I think this is a really useful flag, because I think running Grype can be really noisy, and filtering down to the actionable ones is a great start. And so the feature request we have is basically, if I'm on 9.4 EUS, like normally if you're on Red Hat 9 and there's a fix for Red Hat 9, you can get it by doing a yum upgrade or whatever it is you type. And so we'll show anything that has a fix anywhere in the Red Hat 9 lineage. And the request here is to say, if I'm on 9.4 EUS, I'm specifically buying a product that keeps me from having to move off of Red Hat 9.4. So you should probably not suggest fixes that are in Red Hat 9.6, which I think is a very reasonable position for the user to take. I think they're right to request this feature. But I think that and Keith, please stop me if I'm going off of what you wanted to talk about here. But I think
Still trying to
there's
load context. You're doing a much better job than I would
okay.
be. Thanks.
All right. So I think what's interesting is there's this like baked-in assumption in Grype that users will upgrade packages but not distros, and then in EUS they'll like, and then in Red Hat we'll say, well, you'll upgrade distro minor versions but not major versions, because minor versions of RHEL are pretty transparent to the user. But then if you're on EUS, minor versions of RHEL maybe aren't transparent to you. And so I feel like I kind of wish Grype had like a configuration knob that's like what kind of stuff you're willing to upgrade. It reminds me of another feature request where someone said, this is a Python 3.12 app. Stop suggesting that I go to Python 3.13. Like if I pass dash dash only fix and your suggestion is that I get my whole app working on a newer version of the Python interpreter, I don't want that suggestion. I want only fixed to not suggest upgrading the language. I think, you know, um, Java is another ecosystem where people can get really entrenched in like, this is a Java 11 app, and making it like a more modern Java app is functionally a rewrite. And so we don't want to do that. We don't want only fixed to tell us to bump the JDK. And so I think that what's really part of what's asked for here is a knob that says like, Am I willing to update packages? Am I willing to update
Right.
like right? Am I willing to update language interpreters? Am I willing to update language interpreters minor versions but not major versions? Am I willing to upgrade distros minor versions but not major versions? There's no way to tell Grype that. Right now, Grype just says if it's a package, you're willing to upgrade it any amount, even if you're going from like Java 8 to whatever the newest, greatest Java is. And if it's a distro, you're not willing to do anything. And that's that assumption can be wrong on both ends. And so that's kind of what I'm wondering is if anybody is like how to think about that, maybe how to represent that in the config.
Well,
Right. Oh, go for it, Chris.
Well, the other thing that I wanted to bring up too that maybe we don't have time for, but the way that we would be doing this is that we would actually be going into the US matcher. And for all like I think it's basically for all disclosures that show that they would require a distro upgrade from the source to reach like this rel main fix, we want to update those into like a synthetic not fixed so that we can allow, only fixed to behave in the way that Will just described. So let's talk about what Will said, but I also just wanted to allude to like kind of how we would solve this if we were to like go down this path.
Some of this is coming back to me, and I think it's related to another thing, just like you said, Will, which is like maybe I don't want to get major versions. Maybe I only want to see patch versions that can apply or something along those lines, right? And so like this would cover that case because they would have a minor version upgrade and they wouldn't have a patch fix. And so it wouldn't show them a minor version upgrade if we only showed patch fixes.
And we have a lot of this like implicitly kind of done. From the inception of Grype, like there's some implicitness about when we decide to search for vulnerabilities. So like for instance, we only search for vulnerabilities within for some ecosystems, like the major version of a thing. Sometimes it's major minor version of a thing. It just depends which OS we're talking about, but we don't like in theory, we could have searched for fixes beyond that major version. But if you gave us an image that was Red Hat 9, we're not going to look for anything to do with Red Hat 10, even if there's a won't fix for something, but there could be a fix for Red Hat 10. So it's like, and this kind of comes back to like the concept we talked about in the past, which is like, well, what if we were to not only the configuration input to Will, what you're saying, but like, what if we had something to display on the output? Because the user may not have any preference about what, like, we don't want to require the user to have to say, like, I am tolerant to like upgrading by major version and sometimes by minor version or not in this ecosystem. We kind of want to give them something that they can just, point Grype that with default config and just, what are the results? But we want the results to also be able to explain. This is what there's nothing there today for. We want to be able to explain like, hey, this whole collection here of things falls underneath the category of if you take one action, which is upgrade your OS minor version, you are remediating all these things. So it's like an action-based orientation. Like this one action gets rid of 90 things. But alternatively, you could take these 30 actions and it will get rid of 70 of these things instead. And being able to just show them based on what that action is. Like, so upgrading a major version of OS is usually a lot more work than upgrading the minor version of OS, but we can show them both of those actions and let them know what the impact would be, how many of those you need to do. And I agree, like I struggle with what that config input would be for what you're saying, well, but I also wonder, and I also struggle with like what the output should really be to convey that as well. So I think this is actually larger than, so like this whole issue is talking about like what only fixed could be. And I feel like there's a big old large spectrum where like, that's the smallest of changes, and the other ones that we've been talking about is like the large changes. So I think require whole proposals of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I think that, but I think you got to something really important, which is that it would be nice to say in the output, like, that there are other options, right? It would be nice to say in the output, like that. Yeah, because I think a lot of times when all these like only fixed or like sort by severity or like don't tell me about the JDK or like whatever options people are throwing at Grype, what they're really saying is I want Grype to suggest stuff I could do something about safely. And that like and what they mean by that is very context dependent. So signaling the options to the user makes a lot of sense. It is the top of the hour, so we're done for this week. Um yeah, thanks for watching. Um, please comment on the GitHub issues or on the discourse or whatever. If there's something we can help you with in regards to these tools, or if you have opinions on the direction or the implementation, or you want to chime in. We also have community calls about 2 hour, I guess 3 hours before this time every other week. So we had one this week, so not next week, but the week after we'll have one where people can join and talk to us. Anyway, thank you for watching. Bye.
Goodbye.
Hey, folks.